ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Carter Family Fold. My name is Rita Forrester, and I'll be your host for the evening. And I'm mighty glad to see everybody out tonight to see the Jeff Little Trio. How many have got to see them before? So y'all know you're in for a big, big treat. It's music like you haven't heard before here. And I always love it when they come. We always try to ask where folks are visiting from, and we captured a few places. I know because I've talked to them that we have visitors from New York and New Jersey. We're glad to have you. And we have visitors from Texas. Where y'all? Any other places?
Idaho.
Idaho. Any Massachusetts, Connecticut, Indiana. Any other place? Did I hear South Carolina?
Florida.
Florida. We have a tradition of giving away a cap to the person who's traveled the furthest distance to visit us, and it's courtesy of Virginia Tourism Corporation. So we think that Idaho has probably traveled the furthest distance. Germany, will you come down and get you a hat? Is there any place else on this?
We're neighbors. Yeah, we were.
Well, wherever you came from, we hope you'll come back to see us again and again. It's your first visit. We hope it certainly won't be your last. We've been presenting shows of bluegrass and old-time music here since 1974, and we're now in our 51st year, so we're mighty proud of that. Thank our sponsors who helped us out all through the year. That's the Bryant Label Company, the Bristol Courtyard Marriott, WETS-FM, and Scott County Telecom. And I want you, if you will, to give a nice hand to all the people you see working. We're volunteers. We volunteer. Volunteers their time. So without them, this couldn't all happen as easily as it does. So we appreciate them and appreciate y'all coming out tonight. And as I say, if you haven't heard Jeff Little and his trio, you have really, you're in for a treat. You've come on a good night. So if you will, of course I need to mention too, and I forgot, that you can visit the cabin or museum. Both of those are adjacent, and they're both historic landmarks. Just next door, they'll reopen at intermission. If you want to see a third historic landmark and you want a place to go to church tomorrow, Mount Vernon Church is 1 mile and a fourth from the cabin, and they'd be happy to have you. Services at 10 a.m. They love visitors, no dress code, so you'd be welcome to go to Mount Vernon Church, where a lot of our family's buried, and we're now, I think, the 7th or 8th generation of Carters attending Mount Vernon Church. So we're mighty proud of our little country church. And I want to tell you about an event we have coming up, Appalachia Rising. That's on June the 21st. We'll be having Jim Lauderdale, Trey Hensley, and Hogslaw. That's quite a mixture right there. So you should have a good time. And next week we have Ivy Shepherd, who's a wonderful old-time musician, and she's put together a group. They're called the Groove Cutters. So if you want some really good old-time music, come on out next week. And I know we have a travel writer, I think, from Zimbabwe next week who'll be out doing a story. So come on out and join us next week as well. And we appreciate you coming. And if you will, just give the warmest of Carter Family Fold welcomes to the Jeff Little Trio.
so much. It's always a pleasure to be here at the Carter Family Forum, and thank you, Rita. So a little bit later on, we're going to do a couple of Carter Family songs as well as we get into the show tonight. If you haven't heard us before, my name is Jeff Little. I'm a piano player from Boone, North Carolina, which is across the mountain here. And we go around playing all sorts of traditional music everywhere we go. But before we play, I always like to introduce the members of the trio. Here in the center, he is one of the finest acoustic guitar players you'll hear anywhere. Also a two-time national champion on the five-string banjo. That's Mr. Steve Lewis. And over on the mandolin, he's been doing a great job for us for several years now. And he all of a sudden, when he was a teenager, just said, I think I'm going to start playing the mandolin. That's my son, Mr. Luke Little, on the mandolin. So we're going to do a few more fiddle tunes than we normally do when we play other places, because we know folks like to dance here sometimes, or all the time. But nevertheless, we're going to start with a song we always start our shows with. This is just a little instrumental to get warmed up, and this is actually a Django Reinhardt Stephen Grappelli song. This one's called Minor Swing. You guys ready? Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, being from the mountains of North Carolina, I always started playing a lot of fiddle tunes and that sort of thing. So I'm going to do a real famous bluegrass fiddle tune for you that you, but it's not often done on the piano. This is one called the Orange Blossom Special. I appreciate the confidence. Thank you. There's just a few Ray Charles licks to give a little warmed up. Grove, my love, Shady Grove, I say. Shady Grove, my love, I'll go away. Shady Grove, my love, Shady Grove, I say. Shady Grove, my love, I'll go away. In the summertime, apples in the fall. I can't have the girl I love, I'll have no one at all. Shady Grove, my love, Shady Grove, I say. Shady Grove, my love, I'll go away. I used to have an old banjo, strings made of twine. Always on everywhere, there's trouble on my mind. Shady Grove, my love, Shady Grove, I say. Shady Grove, my love, I'll go away. Thank y'all so much. We really appreciate that. Well, I'd like to feature Luke and Steve on a little picking song right here. And, let's get the key of A minor there, guys. We'll do one more quick song for you right here. This is actually a David Crispin song. He's a wonderful mandolin player. So we're so glad to be here tonight. And if are there a few folks, this is your first time you've heard us play out there? A few folks? Oh, great. Well, thank y'all. Well, we just want to let you know wherever you're from, we play all sorts of theaters, festivals, colleges, all sorts of things. And if you know a place that you might like to have us come play, just give us a call. The greatest thing is we're not near as expensive as we look. So just, I don't know why they find that so funny. So here's a little David Crispin song right here. This one's called Kind of get you right here, doesn't it? So the greatest thing about, going out and playing on the road and playing our songs is we never have a set list. And the best part about that for me is Steve and Luke have no idea what this next song is right now. It's my favorite part of the show. Sometimes we just like to play this little Memphis groove until I think of something to sing. So I'm working on it right now. Here we go, boys. I hear that train coming, it's rolling right in. I ain't seen the sunshine since I don't know when. Well, I'm still close to Christmas. Time's dragging on. As the train keeps rolling. This is more like a Celtic kind of fiddle song. And this song's probably many, many years old, and it's a public domain song, but it's actually a guitar player's favorite song. This one's entitled Whiskey Before Breakfast. Thank y'all so much. We really appreciate that. We're going to slow it down for one song right here, and I guess take a break from the dancing for one song here. Everywhere we travel, we always try to do a gospel song or a hymn. We're going to do one of those for you right now. It's just our way of saying thank you for this great blessing to get to go out and play music and do that sort of thing. And I always tell this little story. I go to a small little church out in the country, and we had the same piano player for many years, and it got to where she couldn't play anymore. And they said, Jeff, well, maybe on Sunday mornings, if you're not out on the road, could you maybe play some piano at church? I said, well, I'll be glad to. And then they asked me something kind of interesting. They said, can you read music? Of course, I told them not enough to hurt my playing. So once we got past that part, I said, well, as long as you don't mind the way I play them, I'm just going to play them like I think they go. And they said, that's fine. So if you come to church when I'm there, you're going to be listening to one of the 40 top hymns of all time. That's kind of how it works. That's the ones I know. But I still have a hymn book up there, and they said, well, if you're not reading the music, why do you have a hymn book? I said, I have to remember how many verses it is so I'll know when to quit. It's pretty important. But nevertheless, when we're thinking about doing a gospel song or hymn, we were trying to think of things that would work good for the trio. And this is an old tune that's probably hundreds of years old. And but you don't hear it very often. We thought it'd make a beautiful instrumental for the trio. This is our version of an old tune called Be Thou My Vision. Well, the sun's gonna shine on my world once more. Let's go live here again. Things are gonna be the way they were before. Let's go live here again. Here we go, y'all. Let's go live here. Let's go live here. Let's go live here again. No more loneliness. So we're going to have Steve get out the banjo right here, and I'd like to tell this little story about Steve before we get the 5-string out. So they have these national championships out in Winfield, Kansas. There's a huge acoustic music festival out here, and all these great players from all over the world. And Steve. They go compete like on banjo, fiddle, acoustic guitar, all those wonderful things. And so several years ago, Steve goes out and enters the 5-string banjo national championship, and he wins the national championship on the 5-string banjo. So like that wasn't good enough. If you win, you have to sit out for 5 years. They won't let you enter anymore. He sat out 5 years, and the very next year he was eligible. He won it a second time. So all that was pretty good. So, Steve, he said, well, I just got to try something different. So he decided to enter the acoustic guitar flat picking national championship. And guess what? He won the national championship flat picking guitar as well. The real reason I like to tell this story is this. I don't know where I was at the time, but I get a text from Steve and he says, guess what, man, I just won the guitar championship in Winfield. And so I texted him back and I said, man, that is awesome, that is unbelievable. And then in parentheses I put, by the way, this gig still pays the same. So, I just want to make sure we have that squared away before you can work. But if we've got the national champion here, I think I'll hear some Earl Scruggs. What do y'all think? Thank y'all so much. We appreciate it. on the farm. Only around the shack till the train comes back. Going in my sweet baby's arms. Going in my sweet baby's arms. Going in my sweet baby's arms. Only around the shack till the train comes back. Going in my sweet baby's arms. Well, we really appreciate that. We do an original song for you right here. This is a little instrumental that I wrote several years ago. We do have some records here tonight and some other merch over here when we take an intermission a little bit. And, so this is on the Made in the Blue Ridge CD. If anybody still has a truck old enough that has a CD player, I do. Okay, good. I'm glad to see that. We really need that pretty bad. So nevertheless, if at intermission a little bit later, if you'd like to go by and stop at our merch table, our merchandise person will be over there, and it's pretty amazing because they have an amazing resemblance to Luke. So if you'll see Luke, you'll know where to go. That works. But a lot of my family is from a little community on the North Carolina-Virginia border. It's east of here, Grayson County, Virginia, Ashe County, North Carolina. And so this is an instrumental I wrote several years ago, and I thought the name of the community would be a good title for the song. This one's called Grassy Creek. so much. We really appreciate it. We're going to feature Steve on the banjo on another tune right here. And, this is an old route standing song. And this is a little tune called the French Mountain Backstep. Because I'm sure when you were driving to the show tonight, you were thinking to yourself, if I don't get to hear anything else, I sure hope I get to hear some route standing on a piano. I'm sure that was at the top of your list. All those millions of people out there. We'll do one for you right here. Yeah. And Steve. Well, thank you all so much. Well, we got time for just a couple more here before we take a break. And there's some folks over here that are working the door tonight, some of the volunteers. They asked us if we could do a song. Let's first give them all a big round of applause. That's very good. We don't even know this song, but just because we're here, we're going to try it. Okay, this is the only time we play it, so let's see how it goes. Thank y'all so much. All right, hang on. Will y'all help us sing? Because I don't know if I know all the words. Anybody out there know the words? Just help us. Okay, here we go. All right, let's hear y'all. Here we go now. song before intermission. We hope you'll stay with us after intermission. We'll check out all the things over the concession stand over here. We're going to feature Luke on this last song. And this was a song, it's an old Latin jazz song, and it was made famous by a mandolin player named Jesse McReynolds. But I mentioned our merch table over here where Luke will be selling CDs, and we got some Made in the Blue Ridge t-shirts and Made in the Blue Ridge hats. He'll be over there for that. And if you might be interested in a CD, Steve, why don't you tell me about our CD guarantee we have?
We do have a warranty of their CDs. If you buy a CD from us, and for any reason whatsoever you do not like the CD, it does not matter the reason why. But you plain just don't like the CD. If you will send that back to us, we will send you a CD that we don't like.
I understand, appreciate that. So we're going to do an old Latin jazz song that was made famous by Jesse McReynolds on the mandolin. Let's do it. Thank y'all for listening to us. Stick around with it for our next set. Thank y'all. sitting on top of the world. Down at the station, headed down the yard, I'm gonna get you a freight train. Been working too hard. Now she's gone, and I don't worry. I'm sitting on top of the world. Now she's gone, and I don't worry. 'Cause I'm sitting on top of the world. Oh, thank you so much. Welcome back to the second set here, guys. And we're going to try to play you some great music this set. And one thing we try to do is appreciate y'all sticking around. We're not going to try to make this set extremely long because Steve and I have done this for a long time here in show business. And one thing we like to do is we like to quit playing before people start leaving, and it makes us feel a lot better with ourselves. It's a pretty important factor when you're playing music. We're going to do a Bill Monroe tune right here. We're going to feature Luke on that fine Henderson mandolin over there. Pay close attention to Steve and Luke on picking this one for you. This is a Bill Monroe tune called Big Mom. sorts of music, any type of genre right here. So we're doing an old blues tune I used to do with Doc quite frequently. Thank y'all, we really appreciate that. So we had a request to do some Ray Charles. And we really don't know any Ray Charles, but that never stopped us from trying something. So this must be the, so this is our version of, I guess this would be the Appalachian version. appreciate that. Thank you. Well, since we're here at the Carter Family Fold, I think we ought to do a little Carter thing before we go. And so this is a little medley of a couple of songs they would do. Steve, you want to grab the banjo real quick, just for these two, and then we'll hop back on these. So, these are kind of like gospel songs. Maybe we take a break from the dancing just for a second, since they're kind of gospel songs, but if y'all would help us sing them, that would be great, because every time we come here, we always try to do a little Carter family if we can, because they were not so only so influential in country music, but all American music. So if y'all want to help us sing these, that'd be really great. Well, let's do Steve get that banjo tuned up. Because once again, I kind of threw this one on. Y'all help us now. Well, I was standing by my window on a cold and cloudy day. I saw that first come rolling, carried my mother with a singing song. Will the circle be unbroken by and by, Lord, by and by? On the way, the sky, Lord, in the sky. Y'all sound great. I said, listen, Undertaker, would you please drive slow on that body that you're carrying? Oh, I hate to see her go. Y'all sing it. Will the circle be unbroken? I hear you. There's a better on the way. Sky, Lord, in the sky. Y'all sound great. Shall we do one more? Let's do it. Let's stay around that G chord. Let's pick up the tempo, guys. Did y'all see how we did that? That's because we're professionals. While Steve's getting the guitar back, I'm going to do one little song on the piano right here. I don't know why I do this song, but I'm originally from Boone, and my family had a music store when I was real young. We used to sell Gibson banjos, Fender guitars, Fender amplifiers, pianos, all that sort of thing. And I learned all these sorts of songs on the piano, like Somebody asked for this earlier. Sorry, that's all I got right there. But we also sold records in there. We had this one record in there that had this most unique piano riff, and I don't know if anybody's ever heard this before, but it went something like this. Has anybody in here heard this before? I was afraid of that. It was on an old Betty Brubeck record. It was a jazz record, and the record, I forget what the album was called, but the song was called Take 5 because it was in this most unique time signature, 5/4. So I kept listening to the record. When the melody came in, it was a saxophone player. Now, heaven knows, me and Luke and Steve, we can't afford a saxophone player for just one song. So I was thinking to myself, I was just going to have to learn both parts at the same time. I'll be real honest with y'all. This doesn't always go that great. But y'all seem like a nice bunch. Oh, thank y'all so much. We appreciate that, y'all. more dance songs here to end the evening here in a second. I wanted to tell one more little story here on the piano. Many years ago, I had the opportunity to go out for an organization called Arts America. Got to play a lot of pretty interesting places. They sent American artists to countries that normally didn't get American culture. And so I got to play in Sri Lanka, Oman, Pakistan, Tanzania, Kenya, all these places. And it was a very interesting trip to get to play all these countries that you don't normally get to go to. So I was in Pakistan, and they asked me to play at Islamabad University. I'll probably be the only person you meet tonight that's had a gig at Islamabad University. You might meet somebody else, I don't know. So anyhow, I was at Islamabad University, and they had evidently there was a tabla player. Evidently this person was the Chet Atkins of the tabla in Pakistan. He was one of the greatest tabla players in Pakistan. And it's one of the greatest drums. It has all sorts of great tonal qualities to the drums. And so that person played a set, and we played a set. They said, can y'all play something together? And this is one of the most interesting things about music, because our music was so different. They said, can we play something together? I was trying to think, well, what in the world am I going to do that we can play together? So I go into this little riff right here. He starts playing with me too. Well, the thrill is gone. The thrill is gone away. Playing a 30-minute set together, and then after that, after we played 30 minutes together, we still couldn't speak one word to one another. And I just thought that's the most interesting thing about the community of music. It really is. As long as you can play and you're in tune, you're in good company at all times. I just thought that was so interesting that we couldn't communicate, but we could play a whole show together, which was pretty happening at that time. So anyhow, who knew that B.B. King would be the universal language of music? I didn't know, but it was evidence, right? He said he suspected that's how it worked. So we're going to do a couple more dance tunes for y'all this evening, so let's burn one down on the banjo. What do you got in mind there, Steve? All right. Last time we played this song was 5 years ago, so here we go, y'all.
I bet y'all can hardly wait. No, I can't.
Just like us. so much. Well, we've had a wonderful time being at the Carter Folk tonight. We thank y'all so much for coming out and listening to us. We've got time for one more song this evening. And before I get done, wherever we travel, if you'd like to know where we're playing, our website is jefflittle.net. You can find our full schedule. Here in a couple weeks, we're going to be at a festival over in North Carolina called World Fest, which is right in Wilkesboro, North Carolina. After that, we'll be down there at Chapel Hill to another festival called Shakori Hills Folk Festival and Dance Festival. And just got a pretty busy schedule. We'd love to see you at a show sometime. And if you'd like to get in touch with us, you can send us an email there. And my people will get back with you. Of course, I am my people. But anyhow, before we're done this evening, we're going to do one more tune for you. I just always appreciate a lot of things, but back on the sound tonight's Mr. Tim Norris. Let's give him a hand. Let's give all the volunteers here involved a big hand for all the work they're doing here to keep this awesome. And before we're done tonight, two really great musicians. Mr. Steve Lewis right here on the